Assuring performance and quality of virtualized networks is challenging from a DevOps and quality of experience perspective. Here at TIA's Connectivity Jam, we're joined with Fraser Pajak. He's Chief Executive Officer at Quest Forum. We also have Tim Doolittle. He's Director of IP Network and Systems at CenturyLink. They're both here to give us their points of view on assurance. And gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Well, thanks for being here. Tim, glad you made it. Fraser, we've met back in the TIA office a couple of times up in Washington, D.C. I want to start by asking you both same question, and either of you can start. When we see DevOps really coming into the fray, coming into the picture as far as getting products from lab to market very, very quickly, not only in years as in prior experience, but now in months and even days sometimes even with certain products. How does that impact the performance of virtualized networks? And Tim, I'll start with you.
The performance of the virtualized networks, it's from a network performance point of view, I think what we'll see is actually some more variability in performance than the standard wireline networks that were physical based, because those are more set in concrete, set in fiber, if you will. And the performance in terms of latency and those sorts of parameters were pretty predictable and fixed. In the virtualized world, that will be more variable. Now that isn't necessarily bad, and the virtualized infrastructure can control that to some extent. But I think we'll definitely see more variability in those basic latency parameters that people have been used to. Now, in terms of the performance of the product from a feature perspective, that's going to change dramatically. The speed at which different features get released is of course going to be much faster, and that's a component of performance. And customers will definitely see that. They'll be able to see networks evolve much faster than they have in the past.
Fraser?
Well, part of the promise of virtualization is to be able to dynamically assign resources to the network. So whereas today you engineer to a certain capacity, and when you reach that capacity for whatever reason, then you have to engineer more capacity. In a virtualized world, the promise is that you can dynamically assign capacity to customers or to services as they change. Because as you know, the user experience changes constantly. You know, have any kind of an outdoor event, and there's all of a sudden a lot of traffic where there's normally not a lot of traffic. And so the virtualization promise is that the dynamic nature, it should dramatically increase network's performance. It also gives you the ability to fill up your assets. Because you know, the way we structure networks today with fixed boxes, you know, you often will get a box with very low utilization over here and an overutilized box over here, whereas in a virtualized world you can really balance that load. So ultimately the promise is that should improve performance.
And he just gave an example of how virtualized networks can improve the customer quality of experience. Tim, can you give us an example as well?
I think when you look at the quality of experience, like Fraser mentioned, where the network can adapt to the user needs, is a great example. Others are that the user will become more, will have greater visibility into the network that they're using, and right now or prior to a virtualized world, customers pretty much saw a network as a black box. And in the future, they'll be able to have much greater insight into how that black box works, how it's operating, and how it's operating for them specifically. So I think that's going to be a major new component to the user experience.
Do you feel like there's, and for lack of a better phrase, a mad rush to get products to market, to get applications to market, and not necessarily determining whether the virtualized network is functioning properly, not only now, but in the near future? Fraser, can we start with you on that one?
Sure, I obviously there is. I mean, part of the promises of virtualization is to dramatically slash the time to market for products and services, right? And it will do that. But what we found in our panel yesterday in particular is there's the human factor piece of the trust, you know, between the people that design and implement the technology and the people that run it. And we still have to solve that problem. And I think part of the solution to that problem is the DevOps model, where for the first time, in order to get the speed that we want the technology will give us, we need to have the organization ready to act in a much more rapid fashion. And guys like Tim that are up at 4 a.m. fixing the things when things go wrong, you need to feel that there's been enough test and instrumentation and certification to go fast. And so I believe the DevOps model's overdue, but it's a critical piece to getting the success of the promise of speed to market, without having some major stumbles along the way.
Tim, challenges in assuring that the network is performing at an optimal level in contrast to the amount of product and applications in the market right now.
The challenges are great, and part of the reason is the things that Fraser just mentioned. But before virtualization, networks tended to be constructed out of monolithic boxes, monolithic systems that all had defined performance characteristics and failure characteristics and things like that. In the world we're moving into now, the infrastructure is comprised of a large number of virtual elements, all from different providers that need to interoperate together in different ways, and every virtual network will be different. There's no sort of single right answer on how to implement a virtual environment, and so every situation will be unique in terms of the number of piece parts that all have to work together from different vendors and different manufacturers and different software providers. And what that means is that every time you have another moving part in the system, it's another thing that can go wrong and cause a problem. And to be able to ascertain that the particular rev of software in one of those components that you release on Wednesday works properly with whatever the existing rev of all the other components in the system is a question that's very difficult to answer, and typically is answered today by some limited testing, but ultimately by deploying it and finding out that it doesn't work, and then rapidly deploying a change to it. That exposes you to that period of time that hopefully is limited by DevOps model and everything else, but it does expose you to a period of time where there's some limitation or some degradation in your performance.
So of course we're here at TIA's Connectivity Jam. Fraser, I wanted to ask you this, and you're probably the right person to ask this to. How important is it that the vendor community partner up in order to make sure that their technologies interoperate to ensure that there's optimal performance in the virtualized network?
Well, I've been in this industry probably about as long as you've been alive. And one thing I've learned is that we need to go fast. We always want to go faster, right? But there's a certain order to get speed. And I believe if you have the right level of quality and standards baked in, you get speed for free. And that's a lesson we've learned in the industry, that once you have that foundation in place, that organizations like TIA and QuestForm can help create in the ecosystem, and we're building an ecosystem more than ever before, where it's all dependent on each other to work. And when you get that right level of quality and standards in place, then you can go at a very high speed. If you try to do it the other way around, you will always struggle.
Are you finding, Tim, that CenturyLink's relying more on the ecosystem in order to optimize?
Absolutely. So what we're seeing is a proliferation of different piece parts procured from different parts of the industry to build these new virtual networks. And that's a much different model in the past. There's really just a smaller number of suppliers of fixed function devices and that kind of thing. And now the number of suppliers is increasing. By the way, the old ones haven't gone away, and they won't for quite some time. So what we're doing is we're adding into that universe some additional virtualized functions that are all coming from, in many cases, different providers. So we're actually compounding the complexity of the end-to-end system, and what that does is it creates a large variability in how all these things are implemented, and it really cries out for the standards that Fraser was mentioning and the frameworks in which these things can be put together, because without that, it's going to be a very inconsistent experience, and the trust factor that Fraser mentioned before is going to suffer in the world at large, because if there's high-profile failures of this whole technology, it's going to sort of sour everybody on the idea itself. So by coming up with standards, by coming up with agreements, by standardizing things like APIs and how the framework in which you build these systems, we have a chance to to really increase the speed for free, as Fraser mentioned, because now everyone is developing to the same, in the same environment, maintain the virtualized nature of it, but have standards within which all that virtualization plays, and then we can have quality and consistency.
And let's be clear, standards don't mean closed. Like standards can play well in an open environment. An example, if you go back 20 years, why did the internet explode? The reason I believe the internet exploded and was a palette for innovation is because there was a right level of standardization. Open standards, like IP addressing is an open standard. BGP protocol for the internet is an open standard. SNMP to manage network devices is an open standard, but it's a standard. And now all the players, when you adhered to that minimum standard, could interoperate, and that enabled a great deal of innovation in a short period of time. So I don't want people to take away from this, when we say standards, we're not talking about closed, we're talking about an open environment, open APIs based on a standard. That's the glue that makes it all work.
Well, I know that TI is very much behind building NFE network performance assurance tools and best practices, and that's underway now. So it's good to talk to both of you, and again, the right people to talk to in this space. Tim, it's good seeing you again.
Thank you.
I always talk about how much taller you are than I am. So we put you on the end of the panels. We call it a bookmark, or a bookend rather. So
a bookend, perfect.
You're not a bookmark, you're a bookend. Fraser, it's good seeing you again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.